Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. As many of us know by now, either from firsthand experience or the stories we hear on podcasts such as this, the whole alien abduction experimentation hybrid program is not only non-consensual, but is a degrading and terrifying experience in which almost no one gets left with a positive message for humanity, nor downloads that leave them feeling 5D, but often leaves them feeling broken, isolated, and traumatized. Today's guest, Fringe, has created a space on X where people can join in an ongoing conversation and air their grievances and get some of this stuff off of their chests. She has a very intense litany of personal experiences with these programs that continue to this day, and she's here today to share some of them with us. I start off the conversation by asking Fringe how all of this stuff came to her attention.
So if I start with present day, what I can tell you is that my entire life I have been, or I should say my entire adult life, I have been dealing with what most people refer to as shadow beings. Shadow people or shadow beings. There's one individual people refer to as Hat Man.
Yes.
And so my entire adult life was dealing with shadow beings. And it wasn't until a few years ago, and I'm going to lose track of time at this point, but it's 2024. So at about 2021, through an interesting series of events, I started becoming more and more conscious and lucid during my experiences. And it wasn't until a year or so after that that I started realizing that these shadow people are actually, at least some of the shadow people, I can't claim it's all shadow people or shadow beings, but at least some of these shadow people are actually involved in what is commonly referred to as an alien abduction. And so while I had had some interesting experiences as a child, most of my experiences as an adult were dealing with shadow people. And very frequently with shadow people, it's I would see the shadow would get on top of me, I would be paralyzed. A lot of this event feels demonic or evil. It can feel like I'm about to die. Those are the common things that happen with shadow people. And so interestingly enough, when this first started happening to me, I was 17 years old. I'm 55 now. And so when this first started happening to me that I was aware of, there was no literature out there. There was nothing in the library I could find. That we didn't have any internet. We didn't have cell phones and pagers and, information at our fingertips. My information came to the library. And so when I first started dealing with this phenomenon, I truly thought this was demonic. I had no other framework for it, and it feels very evil. And imagine something that's dark or black, getting on top of you, and it feels like they're trying to kill you. So yeah, of course. And then when I was in my late 20s or early 30s or so, and by the way, this was also happening to my siblings. And when I was in my late 20s or early 30s or so, the internet was out. I actually had a PC at my house. And I think I first saw this in a magazine. like, oh, this is these shadow beings, which they didn't have a name at the time that I'm aware of. It's actually something called sleep paralysis. And so I read all about sleep paralysis. I looked it up. I researched it as much as I could at that time with the limited information that was out there. And I realized, oh, okay. I actually kind of clung on to that. The science is telling me that this is actually a hallucination. I'm not actually about to die. This is not real. This has been happening to people for centuries. It's all across many, many cultures. It's called different things, and this is, just something that happens in between being asleep and being awake. And so for a long time, I actually bought into that. And I actually told my siblings, "Hey, this thing that happens to us," and I later found out it was also happening to my mom, and I believe my grandmother spoke about it a bit as well, in later years. Uh, don't worry about this. This is just a hallucination. There's nothing actually happening. And so I spent many years believing that as well. And it was difficult to swallow because this is a very, very real thing. A few of these things happened to me while I was wide awake. And so
Wow.
it's not just something in between sleep. But at the same time, it was very comforting. And so I did buy into that for a long time. And then when again, I'm 55 right now today, when I was I was over 50 years old, um, when I started revisiting this topic and I started becoming very lucid and realizing that these are not hallucinations and there's no way to actually classify it in that way. Because the more lucid I became and the more real it became, the more I realized these are not hallucinations. And then I came to understand that it's actually connected to the alien abduction phenomenon. And since that time, I've now come across several abductees who will say the same thing. So, am I saying every single case of seeing a shadow being is related to the alien abduction phenomenon? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying in my case, um, I have actually I'll just tell you of one particular incident because I'm not sure I've even discussed this before. I meant to discuss it a couple of shows ago, and it didn't actually I never actually got there. So I got to where I was actually lucid and aware enough, it was about a year and a half ago, this incident I'm about to tell you took place, where the shadow being actually got on top of me, put me into a straight jacket type of a hold. By this time, I was becoming pretty decent at getting out of the paralysis, because what they do is they paralyze you. And this is just something very common with the abduction phenomenon. The first thing that the entities do is paralyze us. And so I end up breaking out of the paralysis and sitting up in my bed. This was early in the morning. I couldn't even say when it was, maybe even 7 o'clock or something. I sit up in my bed and I see a gray, what is commonly people refer to as a gray alien in my bedroom. And so this is when I'm really putting it together. Wait a minute. I thought this was a hallucination, and now I have a shadow being at least associated, if not actually turning into a gray alien standing in my bedroom. And so I started realizing that these things are related. Now, again, I have since come across, because at that time I was unaware of all of the abduction research. I have now since come across other individuals saying this same thing, and it's actually been out there for quite some time. I was just not aware of it. So I spent the majority of my life, hopefully to answer your question, believing I was dealing with shadow beings. And it wasn't until I was quite a bit older that I started realizing that that was not the case at all, at least for me.
Yeah, yeah. Did you and your siblings, when you were experiencing this, did you ever do it like, did you ever witness each other having these experiences, or were they solo?
No, they were solo experiences, and it wasn't until I was quite a bit older, actually very recently, that I began to speak to my mother about these things. And she ended up telling me that she had seen what is commonly referred to now as Hat Man, when she was a child floating outside her bedroom window. And so she's experienced these things as well. So it wasn't my life is a big giant puzzle, and I didn't start putting those pieces together until I was older. I didn't start looking back and going, "Oh, wait a minute. There was that one time, was when I was really little when I saw these creatures in my bedroom." There was another time when I was very young that I very likely had a near-death experience, which is common among abductees. And then after that experience, I ended up with a very small entity that I perceived was living in my hand as a child. And, so these are things people would say, oh, that was just an imaginary friend or what have you. Um, but I now know the abduction research shows that grays will actually present themselves in a way to entice children, to get consent and to get cooperation. And so what I can say, and so I can put all those puzzle pieces together from many, many years ago and come up with a puzzle that's put together. What has happened now as I'm older, I was getting to the point where I was actually very awake and very aware during many of my encounters. And so for me, it's just putting a big puzzle together as a grown up. And this actually happens pretty frequently. People get to my age and even older um, before they actually put it all together and realize what's been going on. And I think some of that is because we're told as children, that's just a dream. That's not real. There's not really a monster living under your bed. And even as an adult, I was told by the scientific community, don't worry, just take a deep breath and lay there and let this happen because this is just a hallucination. And so I think many of our experiences, just as human beings, all of us, we kind of sweep them away and we look for the prosaic explanation. That's what most people do. That's what I did. And even to this day, if I have something strange happen to me, I don't immediately go to, oh, must have been the aliens, I look for the prosaic, simple explanation first. But I think when we do that, we take the other explanations off the table.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think what's important is just to keep both options there.
for sure. And to be able to recognize and delineate one from the other. So you mentioned that the grays can sometimes take different forms to gain consent from kids. So you think that consent is a part of this?
Well, I think it is. So there's different ways to think about consent. A lot of times it does seem like they're looking for consent of some kind. I think sometimes it just makes their job easier. So the grays, in my own experience, they often put out a projection and they will project themselves as just about anything. So yeah, with kids, they're known to come up with some type of cartoon character or something the child is interested in. Um, I think it was a mini series by Stephen King. They used the Easter Bunny. I have seen an Easter Bunny. Other abductees have seen the Easter Bunny. So, and as adults, a lot of times they will put off an image of a dead relative, sometimes an authority figure, sometimes a movie star, sometimes a religious figure. So they just use different things to project into our minds to assist with cooperation. Now, there very likely could be some esoteric laws of the universe, occult laws of the universe that require them to seek permission. Although I will say that even when they don't have it, they will lie, cheat, and steal to try to get it. So I don't want anyone to victim blame abductees saying, oh, you must have given them permission. You probably did, but they probably tricked you to get it, or at least in many cases, people are tricked to give that permission. Imagine a child being lured with the Easter Bunny and then some entity saying, oh, well, you agreed to come with us. I mean, it gets ridiculous. And yet these entities will convince, especially adult abductees, that there's some type of pre-life contract or some type of permission that was given. I think it's gaslighting and propaganda. That doesn't mean that there's zero cases of that. I just think in general, these entities are taking advantage of us and they take advantage of our naivete and they give us, these lines, different lines, depending on where we're at in life.
What about let's go back to this small entity that you experienced when you were a kid that you could hold in your hand. What form did that take? And was there an exchange that you had?
I apologize. And right now I'm trying to turn you up because I can barely hear you. I'm
No,
not sure how that's
sorry.
happening. That's okay. So when I was a child, I had a little tiny green entity living in my left hand. I had a little kangaroo pouch there. that it would come out and it would run around on my hand. That's how small it was. So I was a child, and then it was very small. Even as a child, it was small. Later, many, many years later, in my 50s, I ended up seeing an image of baby Groot, and it very much reminded me of this entity that used to live in my hand. Although I don't remember having any exposure to baby Groot as a kid. I don't know what year he might have come out. But this entity, I would swear to you, even now to this day, that this was a real thing that happened to me. This would happen during the middle of the day. I was frequently walking home from school. I played a lot alone in the woods. Again, awake. This was not something that happened to me when I was sleeping. It was something that happened to me when I was wide awake, going about my day. The entity was quite friendly. From what I remember, it was rather joyful. It used to come out and run around and kind of make little body movements that made me smile and laugh. And that lasted for, I think it was about 2 years. When I go back, just looking at my childhood and thinking about where was I living at this time, what year was this, how old was I? As near as I can tell, it was about 2 years that this was happening very frequently.
Interesting. And what do you think of that? What do you think this was some way of grooming you into accepting things like that into your existence, or?
So that's what most of the researchers would likely say. When I first started speaking to researchers about my case, I didn't put this little entity living in my hand into any type of category, such as an alien abduction category or a gray alien or anything like that. I looked at it as somewhat of a supernatural paranormal type experience. Although again, it happened during the middle of the day. My eyes are wide open. I'm completely conscious. But I had just kind of filed away there. In hindsight now, and after talking to the researchers, this is what I now understand. It was very likely um, the alien phenomenon already in my life at that time. And grooming, yes. They groom children, again, to get their cooperation. So it's entirely possible, or although I could never know for sure.
Yeah, yeah, of course. When did the shadow people experiences turn into something that was more readily identifiable as some sort of an abduction experience?
That was when I was in my 50s.
Okay.
So I went many, many years with, very strange happenings and these shadow beings. Now I can look back on my life and remember the times that I've woken up with my pants on backwards as an adult. And again, always looking for that explanation, like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
How did this happen? Okay, well, it happens. It happens to people. People put their pants on backwards. And
Sure.
we make mistakes. But I do have a series of events in my life that I can look back on and think, wow, I wonder if that was related this whole time and I just had no idea. When I was a child, I was told I was sleepwalking when I would wake up in different places. For me, I never woke up outside the house that I'm aware of, although that has happened to other people. But I would wake up in the hallway or in the living room or sometimes upside down in my bed or on the floor. And my mom said, well, you must be sleepwalking. It's possible I was sleepwalking. So all I can really do is, as an adult, with what I now know are my conscious experiences, is look back to my childhood and think there's a lot of puzzle pieces there that do fit. Um, but because it's in history and in the past, that's really all I can say. Those puzzle pieces really fit, and this has likely been with me for since I was born.
And did those abduction experiences immediately take on a sinister tone, or did that take an awakening to come to that point?
No, they didn't immediately take on a sinister tone. I mean, if you could think about being taken out of your bed at night by creatures, uh, they're performing a lot of gynecological exams. There's a lot of medical happenings going on. Um, Very early, when I was becoming more lucid and awake, I had met a hybrid child. So crazy stuff happening, but nothing outright sinister. And again, that's very difficult. It's difficult to put that all into one paragraph because it's sinister in and of itself. to be taken out of your environment and taken into their environment. Absolutely unacceptable, in my personal opinion. You'll have other people who argue with that and they say, oh no, they're here for our own good. They're doing good things. And, it's like taking a pet to the vet. And those people are entitled to that perspective. From my perspective, it's not okay. But when I was starting to wake up and understand what was going on, I kind of feel like I was led down this path of a new age type thinking. These aliens are here, perhaps they need help with their genetics, or they're upgrading us, or, they're here to help. When I got really deep into my own experiences, I was actually told, that this, I met a psychic, and it's a long story, but it was a complete chance meeting from my point of view. And I was told by this psychic who'd crossed the room to meet me that her guides wanted me to know that I'm going to use the word starseed, although that word did not come out of her mouth, that I was having these experiences, and I had never discussed this with her, but I was having these experiences because I needed to be a light to the world and I needed to spread the word. Um, and that these beings were here to help us and that we were going to be saved by the Galactic Federation. So a lot of this stuff was coming at me. And even when I was letting this psychic, tell me all of these things, I was mostly just listening. There was just an air of inauthenticity about it. There was just something that I just thought, this isn't right. But I did very much get sucked down that rabbit hole. This is all good. It's all for our own good. The Galactic Federation's coming to save us. These creatures are here for us. And it didn't get sinister until I actually started pushing back on that narrative. And this is actually also very common. Again, although I didn't know it at the time, it's actually very common if abductees start pushing back on the narrative, the accepted narrative. That is when I started having very sinister experiences. So as long as I was buying it and kind of cooperating, everything was fine. And by fine, I mean as fine as it can be to be taken against our will out of our environment into their environment. But they have a great way of convincing us that we're part of the team and, part of the effort. Again, and the psychic actually told me, you and your husband are here, you've lived previous lives together. You're here to spread this message that the aliens are coming to save us. It was an entire propaganda show. And this happened in different aspects of my life, not just with this one psychic who crossed the room to speak to me, and I've never met her before. It was happening kind of everywhere. Everything I was seeing was related to this side of the phenomenon. I started pushing back, and that's when I started realizing that, at least some of these things are not our friends and they're not here for us at all. So that's how that happened.
What are some ways that you pushed back?
So I started, I'm going to say it was around October, November, December of and I'm going to get my years wrong now, 2022-ish. I started realizing that I was having what I refer to as my soul. Someone might call it the astral body. Basically, the entirety of myself, my essence, my being, was being transferred out of my physical body and into sometimes bodies that appeared to be just like me, and other times what I perceived to be containers of some type, and other times into other bodies. And so I end up in their environment quite a bit. By this time, I'm maybe 5 days a week. This stuff is happening to me, and it's getting intense. And I start realizing that there's something wrong. So I start kind of trying to pay more attention and realizing my first realization is that these things I don't think are from outer space, and they're very interested in my soul. Whatever this is that makes me me outside of my physical body, they're very interested in it. And I start realizing that they're almost I'm just going to put it in words that fit my own perception. they're trying to reverse engineer the soul, or my soul. They're trying to maybe create something similar, um, maybe some type of hijacking going on. It's very difficult to explain, but this is a telepathic environment. And I start just coming away with these knowings of what they're doing. And this is despite the messaging of what they're telling me they're doing. So when I start realizing, wait, why are these so-called aliens from outer space, why would they be interested in this part of me at all? This makes no sense if they're aliens from outer space. And I had no, I shouldn't say no, I had very, very limited exposure to any UFO materials or any of the research from other people who had already addressed this question. I had no idea. I just thought, what are aliens from outer space doing with my very soul? This makes no sense. And that's when I started really pushing back, because I just thought, man, these are not aliens. And I'm actually absorbing information from that environment. And then by this time, I'm actually getting teachings at the beginning of many nights a week. I'm getting teachings and information from something non human. Whether it's the good side or the bad side, a lot of times I still try to figure it out. I'm not entirely certain, but I start getting these teachings. And so I start coming away from my experiences knowing certain things. And this is my knowing is just my perception and what I can tell you that happened to me. And that is that they were not from outer space at all, and that they were doing something very nefarious with my soul. And so when I started realizing that, I was pushing back now during abductions. Now, for your audience, I don't know how many abductees you've had on your show or what they've been exposed to on other shows, but abductions can either be very, very physical. They aliens, so-called aliens, can take our physical bodies out of the physical environment and into their environment. They can also take just our soul or just our astral body. They can remove it from our bodies and into other places. And then there's also a phenomenon that the abduction researchers call virtual reality, which is where the body doesn't go anywhere and your soul or astral body doesn't go anywhere either. And they just kind of plug into your mind and play out different scenarios. And it can come across as a lucid dream, um, where the abductee is actually very aware of what's going on, but yet the abductee has not actually left the environment. And so these things are going on to me. And on top of that, I'm getting these teachings as well. What was your question again? I usually write it down and I didn't. Do you
That's
remember?
a good question. I think started off with how did you push back?
Oh, how did I push back? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
so um, I'm going to write it down so I don't forget. So I started out, the more aware I would become. I'm sorry, just something crazy popped up on my screen just now. Try to get back. The more aware I was becoming, and the more aware I was that things were probably not what they pretended to be, I started to become agitated and uncooperative during abductions. So it could be anywhere from, there was one time I full on got into a full on physical, what I perceived at the time was physical before I was separating into categories and paying attention. Because the things I explained to you, they have different characteristics. And so over time, I actually became aware of that and I started trying to keep track. But this particular incident felt like a very physical incident where I was in a hallway and what I perceived to be a ship. And I had what I perceived to be a nurse um, escorting me. And I knew she was going to try to give me an injection of some kind. And I ended up pushing back and literally wrestling with her in the hallway until I was knocked out. And so that's what I mean by pushback. But it could also be something like, and I'm going to use words. They don't use words. Everything is just known. And so if I knew I was supposed to walk down this hallway and get into a like a med bed or onto a table, I would refuse to do it. And so I was being uncooperative. And then, so the more aware I am, the more uncooperative I become. But make no mistake, they control that environment, and they control us, and they control our minds. So no matter how difficult I would be or how difficult I could become, I was no superhero. And so, unfortunately, during this time, I actually felt like a superhero, and I kind of thought I was, but in fact, I was not. And they showed me that pretty quickly.
Mhm.
Um, so no matter how disruptive I was trying to be, it's an illusion because they just knock you out and put you right back down into zombie mode is what I call it. And, you find yourself cooperating with what they want. So that's what I was doing to push back. And prior to that, I was being more cooperative. And then I wasn't. And once I was not being cooperative is when I started seeing different types of creatures besides aliens. This is when I met what I can only call and refer to as demonic creatures. And different types of things started happening to me. And again, it's my perception that it was retribution and punishment. In fact, at the very, very end, they were letting me know that I was being punished for not going with the narrative. And so this is something that's very difficult to explain unless, someone was actually there. But I am actually between about December, January of 2022 throughout 2023 and in about the spring to early summer of 2023, I am being told in no uncertain terms that I'm being punished for not going along with the narrative. And it's very difficult to articulate to your audience. All I can really do is tell you this is my perception of what was happening to me. So I went from, wee, and flying on a spaceship to extreme abuse and punishment by these entities.
Is there any way that you can describe what the experience is like to have one's soul extracted? Like what that involves?
Yes. So I can feel it. Now, sometimes, I would say probably most of the time, people are abducted without any awareness at all. It starts with being paralyzed. And at that point, the physical body or the astral or soul body um, can be just vibrated to the extent that it just passes through matter. At least this is just how I perceive it. It feels, you just pass right through matter, up through the roof, out through the window. When the soul is removed, it feels like okay, so let me back up. I had been out of my body many, many times over my life. I had had many out of body experiences, even starting as a child. And so if anyone in your audience has been out of body, it's a very different type of feeling. A lot of times you can look back and see your own body and know you're not in the body, right? If you pop into the etheric realm looks different than the physical realm. A lot of things appear to be the same, but for me, it's a very gray to green scale type of environment, and everything might not be exact. So I had been out of my body many times, so I did have something to compare it to, but I could actually feel my soul being sucked out of my physical body. Now, I want to make sure that I actually catch up with information that I just got over the weekend. I met with somebody last week, and this person is very well experienced in 100% physical abductions. And this person was telling me a lot of times it's hard to even tell. And so the feeling of being taken, the physical body being taken and the spirit body being taken are very, very similar. And in fact, many abductees will swear they were physically taken when they would never left their environment. But what I did was I actually set up a camera in my bedroom. And so there were times when the camera malfunctioned and I had an experience, but there were times when it seemed to me that the camera was on, no issues, no interruptions, no glitches, although, it wasn't a great camera, but no glitches. And yet I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had left my body, had been sucked out of my body. And there were times I actually returned with bruises on my physical body. And so it can actually get kind of weird. And I think a lot of abductees believe they're being taken physically, and they maybe are not being taken physically. It's just everything that they are besides their physical body being taken. Um, there's a lot of overlap. So to me, it feels very much just like being sucked out, like a vacuum is being used,
Hmm.
to
Quite
hopefully answer your
traumatically.
question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would imagine that's a pretty traumatic sensation, or at least a very startling one.
It is. If you're
Yeah.
awake for it, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. And you said something about that then after your soul would be extracted, they would put you in another body or in a body that looked like yours or some other vessel, which leads me to think of there's been talk the last few years of cloning centers and stuff like that. Have you ever had any experience with those institutions?
I have. So I haven't seen a cloning center. There are abductees who have. I'm in touch with Ted Rice. I'm not sure if you've come across Ted Rice. He's an older gentleman. Have you heard of Carla Turner or
Not heard of
Barbara
her either.
Catholic? No. Okay. So these are researchers from the 90s, and Ted Rice has a book written about his life experience. It's called Masquerade of Angels. Um, and so there are many abductees who have experienced seeing these cloning centers. I am not one of them. However, I have experienced being inside what I perceive to be a cloned body. Like it's me, but it seemed to me to have almost a cartoony face to it, which is odd. And it was me, but not me. So most of the time when I was transferred into a clone type body, the body seemed younger than I am right now today. So it had the feeling of being me, but at the same time, I could look and know that that's not me right now. I'm 55 years old. The body appeared to be maybe 30s. Um, so yes, but I have not seen these cloning centers. Many have. I'm not one of them.
What do you think the purpose of that was, of those experiences or experiments, I should say? Were they for, I mean, yeah, I mean, that could be a can of worms. We've had people on who, one guy, Ron Allen, at night, night, I think for the most part, he gets his astral body taken out, put into clones, performs for, basically pay per view for rich, soulless people.
Wow.
Was there anything like that occurring with you?
Wow. Like a Donald Marshall type, situation?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, I would love to
Mhm.
meet that person. I would love to be in
I
touch with that person.
Yeah, I can make that happen.
That would be great.
Mhm.
So, my stuff is kind of complicated. I wouldn't
Take your time.
say entertainment purposes, no. So all I have is my own conscious recall. I've never had any regressions. I have no idea what's actually happening when I'm not conscious. During these episodes. But I am very frequently accessed and transferred into bodies to perform missions. And a lot of these missions, I still haven't come to 100% determination whether this is some type of training or if it's actually real. Because if the things I'm doing are actually real, we have a problem. I like to think of them as training. But I am taken out of my body, I am put into another body, and then essentially I take over the consciousness of that body and I go on whatever my mission is. A lot of times it's a spy mission, sometimes it's a smuggling thing. Um, and someday I will get out my journal and read through all of them, but that's essentially what I'm doing. So I have heard Donald Marshall. In fact, one of the first times I was able to identify with what was happening to me was when I came across a young woman. Well, she's actually probably my age now. Her name is Elisa.
Yeah,
And
we've had
she
her on.
was have you interviewed her?
Yeah, she's been on twice.
Oh, I would love to speak with her if she
Okay,
would be willing.
sure.
So when I very first figured out what was happening to me, I actually saw Elisa on a podcast. It wasn't this one. And when I first pulled her show up, my body started vibrating and my vision went completely white, like white snow. And I knew, and this is, during the middle of the day, I'm completely 100% conscious of trying to watch a video. And I knew that something was wrong. Like I was just thinking, what is happening, right now? Maybe am I not is something trying to keep me from watching this video? I'm not trying to just see something everywhere where every little glitch must be the aliens. I mean, my body is reacting to this. I end up watching her video, and for the first time, I was able to go, this is what is happening to me. She was the first one. And she was explaining this process. And I think she was referring to Donald Marshall at that time. And so it's my understanding he's being taken to some kind of arena, and some crazy stuff is happening at that arena. I have perceived that I was in arena one time that I can remember, but I don't have those things happening to me. It's not the same thing. I am being sent on these really weird missions, for lack of a better term. And again, I like to think it's training of some kind. Am I actually being sent? Well, I've actually, in real life, uh, perceived that I was in somebody's body and actually then spoken to that person, and the person has verified that I was in that person's body in real
Wow.
life. Um, you know, so something happens where I perceive I was in this person's body and this is what they were wearing, this is where they were, this is the building, this is what was happening. And I've reached out to that person, a real person, and the person has verified by me not giving anything leading, just, hey, what were you doing yesterday? And the person has verified that I was, in fact, in their body. And so this is actually happening. This has now been actually more than once that this has happened where I've been able to verify these things that I perceive. But in general, man, I like to think it's training, but I could be completely wrong
Hmm.
because of obviously, look at what's happening, to Donald
Sure.
Marshall.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Do you think that this is because I mean, all these experiences are happening to you because you're a part of a specific bloodline, family line, lineage, or do you think something to a greater or lesser degree is happening to most of us as far as all this is concerned?
Well, I do think we are all experiencers of the phenomenon. I actually think that we are living among a realm that is unseen. And so I do believe that we are being acted upon, all of us, human beings, are being acted upon by these forces to one degree or another. At the same time, people actually getting snatched out of their beds at night or being subject to my labs, the military abduction phenomenon, do seem to be from certain bloodlines. This is happening to my mother as well, to some extent. I think it was last December, she woke up with a manted creature in her bedroom. She had no reference for it at all. She had never seen these creatures before. Um, so I mentioned that the sleep paralysis, shadow being thing is happening to many people in my family. Right now, I'm getting some information about my granddaughter that is starting to make me a little concerned. Um, And I don't wanna speak to too many people who could be identified, but multiple people in my family have experienced some degree of this phenomenon. I don't think they have the same awareness that I have, but they're experiencing it as well. Again, my mother, on my father's side, he was an experiencer, an abductee. He was involved in the occult. He was involved in human trafficking. That side of my family goes back over 100 years, in the human trafficking business. He has experience with these entities as well. I do think, especially in my case, and probably in most cases, this is genetics and bloodlines that they've been cultivating for many, many years, generations, if not thousands of years.
You mentioned going back to the soul extraction that you were sometimes put into a virtual realm, and we hear talk of transhumanism and how one of the goals is to be able to transfer our consciousness to a machine. Do you think that that is possible?
Oh, yeah. Oh, think it's entirely possible.
Not a, what am I trying to say? Not a replica, but the thing itself.
No, not a replica, and so it's been my own perception, and so what's important for me is that I was having all of these perceptions, and I was actually logging them. I have a journal I was writing stuff down in, and I had perceptions where I was being transferred not into a body, but into some type of AI, and I consider it to be some type of a computer or a television screen, where I was actually inside. Imagine being inside of the computer that's right in front of you. It's bizarre. And I'm writing these things down. I think I was inside of a computer last night. Well, lo and behold, months later, I come across abduction research that shows other people have had these same perceptions. People are being transferred into AI type environments. And so I do believe it's 100% possible, not only for us, but I think it's important to be aware that I think our military industrial complex has this very same ability. In fact, they're likely working side by side with non humans, and they have perhaps a sub technology of the NHI technology. You know, it might not be as good, it might not be as up to par, it might not be as sophisticated, but they have the technology as well. After meeting Ted Rice, and I told him, well, I had this perception that I was actually uploaded, my consciousness was uploaded into a computer. He then told me about one of his experiences. He says, "Oh yeah, they stand you in front of this giant screen, and they actually hook you up to it. Sometimes when they're transferring the body, I've had perception of being inside a vat with water where I can actually breathe. As a matter of fact, when I was a child, I could breathe underwater in 3D, real life. Um, and then I come across abduction research that shows that they put us into these tubes of liquid to transfer the consciousness.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's also interesting. Have you heard of Malonga's research? He's an Italian researcher. Um, and there's a translation issue there, relying on someone who has translated it through AI. But he believes that abductees are actually being used as repositories for alien memories. And Ted Rice believes this as well. And so some of the things we see and remember and some of the experiences we might be having might not actually even be ours. They might be almost like a file being downloaded into our memory banks, and then it feels like we actually experienced it. So I want to throw that out there too. And I think I did write down your question, but I don't remember. I didn't.
All roads lead back to the
Whether
same
that's
place.
AI, yeah, the AI
Yeah, yeah.
thing,
Uh-huh.
and this virtual reality they have is so real, you would not know the difference. The only reason I picked up on it was because it happened so many times. So I had become very uncooperative, and they were, I mean, sometimes 5, 7 nights a week, sometimes multiple times in a night. Um, it took me a long time to understand that some of this is just virtual reality. This is not actually happening. But that could have happened to me many times before I understood that it wasn't real. And again, I think some abductees are being subjected to this type of thing, and they actually have no understanding that it might not be real. So they have a lot of very interesting technology. And I think, again, we're going to be rolling that out. I actually would wonder, I would sometimes wonder what's going to happen when this alien virtual reality technology is actually rolled out to the masses, because it's almost indistinguishable from actual reality.
Some believe we are existing in that right now.
Mhm.
And I wonder sometimes. Sometimes I wonder. I mean, it's easy to because it's the reference point of our time to think that it's in some computer somewhere on a server or something like that. But so I sometimes wonder if just the physical realm in and of itself is some sort of experiment or simulation in comparison, and the reference point would be a maybe existence outside of that is typically a lot less dense than what we experience. And the experiment is putting that soul or astral body, whatever you want to call it, into dense physical matter and just seeing what happens or toying around with the genetics. Or how does that sit with you?
That wouldn't surprise me in the least. If we were just all avatars in some type of a video game and we were all just maybe little finger puppets for a more complete version of us, perhaps. I in fact, I mean, that's my working theory, actually. I mean, I don't know how the science would work, or how the physics would work, but I would not be surprised at all.
Boy, the implications of that. And briefly, you mentioned breathing underwater. Elisa talked about one of her altars being able to do that, breathe underwater.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I'm not sure if I was aware of that or not. I'd have to go back and listen to that podcast. I did have a researcher tell me, in about January of 2022 to 2023, that this was common, among project kids working. I think it was, I don't remember if it was Stanford Research Institute or if there was another body working on behalf of the intelligence agencies, where children were able to breathe underwater. And so when I started talking to researchers, these little tidbits are coming out. Like, oh, well, I was able to breathe underwater when I was a kid. I couldn't right now. I mean, don't ask me to do it. But it is interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Oh man, so much to unpack. You mentioned a background in, or not you having a background, but your family having a background in human trafficking. I'm assuming that children are an aspect of that. Do you think that is more about the physical aspects of that, or the loosh harvesting aspect of that, or are they both inseparable?
I think it's both. I think it's both. So my biological father ran an international human trafficking ring. He was a contractor for the mafia. And again, this went back generations. He was involved, his father, my grandfather, my grandmother. I did not grow up with this family. I was actually adopted out when I was born. Uh, that's not entirely accurate. I went to foster care when I was born. Um, and I never met this side of my family. But as an adult, I met him, and he told me so many stories, about what he was involved in. It actually made me think that maybe he was not telling the truth or maybe a little nutty. And I ended up actually looking into his background and verifying all of the things that he had said to me. And what he was involved in was, not just human trafficking, but also rituals involving human trafficking. And, going out to the desert, there were demons involved. He has seen the lady, if you've heard of her.
Chris Bledsoe, yeah.
He was very familiar with this other entity called De Nino, which is just baby Jesus, really, is what it comes across as. Fake baby Jesus, I should point out. He had been levitated in his backyard. I mean, he was heavily involved in the occult and in human trafficking and in all the undesirable aspects of and unsavory aspects of all of that. Um, and yes, I think it's both. I think there's a physical side to it. And I think when they're engaging in these rituals, they're engaging, satanic forces to feed off of the energy that's coming from these acts.
You said you met him and he told you all of this. Was he telling you with remorse, or was he bragging, or what was his tone?
Well, he he was interesting. So I did almost 20 years in law enforcement, and at that time I was maybe 15 years on the job, maybe 10 years in, and we found each other through some kind of site. The internet had kind of come out, and it wasn't as structured and as prevalent as it is now, but somehow I ended up finding him on a adoption site. And we agree to meet. We meet, and I tell him that I met him with me, my husband, and my mother. So my mother hadn't seen him in, 20 years or however long, maybe longer. And so we all met for lunch, and he asked, "What do we do?" And I said, in law enforcement, and it was a major metropolitan police department he was quite familiar with, and so was my husband. And he immediately says, "Oh, well, I should just tell you then I did a nickel in Quentin." And right away I thought, "Okay." Of course, I meet my biological father after all these many, many years, and woo, who's the lucky girl? Um, and is he a braggart? Yes. But at the same time he was bragging, he was always very suspicious of me, and he always thought maybe I was trying to record him or trying to maybe snitch on him. He was still very much in the world of, working for the mob and snitches get stitches and, that kind of thing. And so while he would brag and tell me so many things that I wish I had written down at the time, um, he was also secretive. And so he would sometimes also speak in, roundabout ways and code language and stuff like that because he was always suspicious of me. In fact, he thought he was going to kill me one day. It was the last day I saw him. So what happened was he starts telling me these stories. We meet for lunch, he's telling me stories. And at first I think, this is a guy who was on the wrong side of the law, but, he's done his time. Well, at first I think he's just nutty as a fruitcake and, he might not even be telling me the truth. And then it gets to where he starts telling me so many stories. Um, I end up checking on him and I end up figuring out that he, in fact, did serve 5 years in prison at San Quentin. He was convicted. I have the court transcripts. He was convicted for this human trafficking. And I got a hold of a reporter in San Francisco, which is where which was one of the bases of his operation. And the reporter actually sends me many, many articles documenting the things that he had told me that he was involved in. Not everything, he told me a ton of stuff that's not in the court transcripts and that's not in the newspaper, but it was enough to substantiate that this guy is not, just lying to me. He's not just nutty. He was actually doing these things. I later on met other family members who corroborated what he was doing and corroborated their part in what they had done. And as this is going on, um, I'm now getting a little I'm not even gonna find the right word. I'm now not entirely excited about meeting the side of my family after I figure out, everything they were involved in, and he's got witnesses and cooperation. It was a whole family who was doing this. Um, and then this was the very last time we actually met. He had driven to my home, and when he arrived at my home, he was acting a little odd. And at some point during our conversation, he tells me, I was on my way up here to kill you. And I, am very nonchalant about it. And I just say, "Oh, really? Why would you do that?" And he says, "They told me that you're a reptilian and that you needed to be eliminated." And at this point in my life, I don't even know what a reptilian is. I am not into any kind of conspiracies or any kind of that type of stuff at all. And all I'm doing is trying to survive this incident and psychologically, meeting him where he's at and just trying to make sure he doesn't try to kill me, right? And so that was the last time we ever met face to face. Obviously, after that happened, we didn't meet again face to face. Um, where was I going with that one, Chris?
That's a good question. Only you would know the answer.
Yeah, I think you said, "Oh, your family's involved in human trafficking." Here I am 30 minutes later. So yes, he was. Everything he told me was verified. I should say most of the things he told me was verified. Um, and it was my entire family neck deep in this for at least a century going back is in the history.
I would like to get back to that, but first I would like to know who they is, the they that he was referring to.
Well, I didn't know at the time. I didn't know if he was hearing voices in his head or I mean, I was not aware of any type of entity involvement or, I wasn't even aware of my own involvement. At this point, I'm having, shadow people experiences. Actually, We actually had a couple of shared dreams, which were interesting now that I'm actually talking about it. I remember us being in the dream environment together. Um, and so I don't know who they were. At the time, I didn't know who they were at all. I now believe that he was probably hearing voices in his head, or entities had told him to kill me. For all I know, it could have been actual real people telling him that I was a reptilian, I needed to be killed. It could be any of the above. I really don't know, and I never asked him, who they were. Um, and it wasn't until many years later that I came across reptilians for myself. I was in my 50s when that happened to me. So, yeah, I survived that incident, and I'm here to talk about it, but I was never alone with him again. I don't even think I ever met with him face to face after that. I think everything else after that was an email, um, maybe some phone calls and stuff.
And you shared a dream with him before you met him or after you met
After.
him?
It was
Okay.
after. So after we met, we became very entangled, and we were having some very, psychic experiences shared, and one of them was an interesting dream. I'm trying to even think about what this was probably 20 years ago now. I was in some type of a dark bar environment, and I drew it all out and put it on paper in the morning, and then I asked him, "Did you have any dreams last night?" And then he actually repeated to me what I had dreamed the night before. So strange things like that were happening, and, I have no idea who I just now as I'm talking to you, Chris, I realized it could have actually been people who wanted him to kill me. I don't know. Um, he was always very concerned about me wearing a wire or, trying to get him on charges that he hadn't already served time for. They were involved in the murder of a police officer in San Francisco, and there's no evidence for it. It's not like I could call. I mean, I thought even at the time, I thought about calling, and saying, "Hey, this guy's guilty," but there's no evidence for it. But he told me in his little roundabout way, that he and 2 other people were responsible for the murder of a police officer who was investigating, the sex trafficking ring. Now, I have to point out that the officer was actually dirty. He was actually involved in the ring. And so he was involved in the sex trafficking ring as a client, and he was also, tasked with investigating it, and that's what ended his life. It was a mess, hot mess, and it's all over the newspaper San Francisco newspapers.
Him even knowing about reptilians leads me to believe I was going to ask the question, was there an occult aspect to this trafficking? And it seems
Yes,
like
and
there
so
must have
and
been.
it yeah, so I wish, man, I wish I had paid more attention to the things he was telling me. I would have so many stories, but I just didn't. Again, I wrote him off as being a little nutty, bragging. I didn't even consider that he was telling me the truth until I, called the newspaper reporter and got all the documents. Um, he definitely mentioned, rituals being conducted by some high-level people at the time in San Francisco. And he mentioned rituals being conducted out in the desert and contact with demonic entities out in the desert, in the California desert. Um, I wrote to him not too long ago and tried to get him to tell me a little bit more about that, and he did not respond. But he might. He might. He likes to talk about what was happening back then. So
And obviously, he's still not involved in that.
obviously, what
He's still not involved in that. The
is
trafficking
he still
and
doing it? Um, well, to my knowledge, no, but once involved, always involved. Who knows what the man is up to? I haven't had contact with him except for email in, I don't even know. It was in my 20 years. It's probably been 20 years since I last saw him in person. Um, but yeah, imagine. I mean, I found out it was not only him, it was my aunt, it was my grandmother, it was my grandfather, it was uncles, it was friends of the family. I mean, this was a family business. And they were all involved in it.
this was primarily for blackmail purposes or just for child pornography or
I think blackmail purposes is definitely on the table. I mean, that was basically what the mafia does is they get people in compromising positions and then they have blackmail material and then they just use that to their advantage to control all the politicians, right? That's what they do. On the occult side, I don't even know where I was going with that. Where was I going with that? I lost it again.
On the occult side of,
Oh, on the actual I mean, the 3D side, yes, they're getting blackmail material for sure. But why are they then also, engaging in rituals where, there's other things going on as well? Or, that could have been part of the blackmail material too, who knows? I mean, that would probably be the best type of blackmail material.
sure. Well, I mean, I guess it's good that they put you up for adoption if that's indeed what happened, because I mean, sometimes the children get involved in that too, or sold into it, or whatever. So you dodged a bullet as far as that's concerned.
I absolutely did. I thank God I was not brought up with that family. As it is, um, again, I started talking to researchers a few years ago, and the first thing they go to is your father probably sold you, maybe before you were even born, and that's how come I ended up neck deep in this stuff. Um, so it's a common theme, but I'm very, very thankful I did not grow up in that environment. I have no idea what that life would have been like, and I know a lot of people live it, and I thank God I was not one of them.
And did he or any of the rest of your family, extended family, have military connections too?
They my military connection comes on the other side of my family. My adopted father's side and then my mother's side is where the military stuff comes in. I am not certain that any of them served. They were much more on the, human trafficking occult side, so I gave him a diary many, many, many years ago when we first met, and I hadn't looked through it in many years. Um, but I recently looked through it, probably within the last year, and I took some pictures of what I found in there, and he was saying things like, um, "I was a Christian until I met the true God, and the true God showed me the way." And so he was very much led away from, probably Catholicism at that time, into worshiping these other entities. And he said these entities had saved his life, multiple times and that they were just kind of with him. So it wasn't until I went back and read this diary that I just thought, oh, wow, there was even a lot more going on than I actually appreciated at that time. When I really look at some of the things he has written down in there, it's pretty sketchy.
Yeah, I know that you are a Christian, and as far as I know, you are not a Catholic. I always wonder what the ties are between this trafficking and the systemic child abuse in Catholicism and the Vatican Library. Like, what the Vatican Observatory? Like, what the hell is going on there? Like, very, very suspect on many
Yeah, I
levels.
agree. I agree. Very
Yeah,
suspect. It's all related.
for sure.
The missing children, the human trafficking, the UFO phenomenon, these entities, it's all very much related.
Hmm. So, do you think these entities are the next step up the food chain as far as the military is concerned? Or are they farther up than that?
What do you mean by
Like,
that?
are they pulling the strings of the military to do their bidding?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely say so. Um, and I don't think it's just our military. I think the private corporations have swooped in and made some agreements and they're reverse engineering the tech. Um, When I say military or I say my labs, I don't want someone to think that their brother, who signed up and wrote that blank check to the United States of America is involved in this. These are very deep, dark, special access programs, unacknowledged special access programs that nobody's brother is in. I mean, someone's is, but not your average everyday person. A lot of this, I think, is your private corporations actually exploiting the technology, and they might even have their own little breakaway civilization by now. Um, but yes, I think that we are living in among an unseen realm, And I think these unseen entities are pulling a lot of people's strings. Like they are acting through us, working through us. We're almost their proxy agents on Earth.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see how. I mean, I think with the whole COVID stuff that happened, we were able to see or have it affirmed. I think many of us suspected it anyway. How all of the tentacles lead back to the same octopus, and it just became blatantly obvious that everybody who's scratching who's back, and that there is a united front as far as the manipulation of reality is concerned.
I agree, and I apologize for being a little distracted. I'm still trying to
That's
turn
okay.
you up. Am I
Oh,
low on your end or
no, you're fine. I
okay?
just turned my headphones up. That's an advantage of having headphones. I can just turn the
Oh,
volume up or
that's what it
down.
is. I
Yeah,
got you
yeah.
turned up all the way and I'm barely hearing you.
Oh,
That's okay. I'm
I'm a
managing.
mumbler too. So, this unseen realm, do you think it's also populated by positive entities?
Oh, I definitely think so. Yes, I definitely think so. A lot of people put me into the category of fear mongering, right? That, I only talk about the negative side and the negative beings and what they're doing. But that's because I don't think we need to be warned about positive beings, right? If the positive beings are there and they're actually truly benevolent and they're of a higher consciousness and they have that higher view of our reality and what's happening, we don't have to worry about them. They're the good guys. So, yes, I think they're there. I just don't think that we have a lot of good guys snatching us out of our beds at night, doing medical experiments, even sexually assaulting men, women, and children on their ships, creating chimeras, creating a hybrid race, all the many things that they're doing. I don't think those are the good guys. So that's where I maybe separate from other abductees. Not all of them, but many others.
You mentioned seeing a hybrid child at one point. Is that the only sort of experience that you've had with a hybrid program, or were you involved in that on some level?
That seems to be the majority of what they're doing.
Hmm.
Is creating hybrids. I have had many, many instances of that. I have met many hybrid children. Not all of them are mine. Um, I am tasked quite often with actually caring for these children, hugging them, playing with them. A lot of times I'll even write down in my journal, giving love to them. They're almost orphans when they're raised in that environment. They don't have human parents in that environment, and so they're not getting a lot of or any human contact outside of abductees. And that's our job much of the time. So, yeah, that's happening a lot. As far as the child I met that I knew 100% was mine, and I suspect there are others, this child was brought to me and put on my lap, and she was very frail looking. She had very, very thin, pale blonde hair with very large blue eyes, and she appeared just to be kind of sick to me. Um, Even her age, I thought maybe she was 3 to 4 years old, but in hindsight, I really don't know. She could have been older than that and just frail and young looking, and I was definitely given the knowing that she was mine, and I even wrote down in my journal, I wrote, "Mine, but not mine," and it was a very strange, feeling or thought for me because, like I've explained before, if you have a child with another human, that child is entirely yours, right? You don't say it's part mine, the child's
No.
part mine.
Yes.
But I knew that this child was only part mine, mine but not mine. And so it was a very odd feeling. Again, not everyone feels that way. Some people feel very, very connected to their children and others don't. I'm aware of abductees who want nothing to do with these alien creatures.
I think there are a couple of ways that maybe one could look at the intentions of some of these entities, especially the ones that we perceive as negative. You know, if a lion gets out of the zoo and goes and kills a few innocent people, nobody would call that lion evil or like they had malintent. They were just being a lion.
Right.
Um, but you think that there's definitely malintent, like this is purposely evil, or is it just coldly indifferent to our our existence?
Well, I mean, to me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to
Yeah,
me. It doesn't
the end
matter
result.
even what their intent is. It doesn't matter to me if they have good intent. It doesn't matter to me if they're trying to preserve their own species. What they're doing is entirely unacceptable, what they're doing to the human race. And people will say, yeah, I mean, are they the lion? They could be. It doesn't matter to me. What they are doing that is entirely unacceptable, no matter who you talk to, is these hybrid creatures they're creating. And then a lot of times the reptilian creatures as well. They are committing heinous sexual crimes against the human race, including against children. And this is not acceptable in anyone's world, I hope. And so it doesn't matter to me what their intentions are at all. It makes no difference to me. I look at what they're doing to us from the human perspective. And if someone wants to call that ignorant, that doesn't matter to me either. That's how I'm looking at it from a human perspective and what's good for humans and what's best for humans, and especially what's best for our children.
What do you think the purpose of the hybrid program is?
Well, um, there's maybe there might be more than two schools of thought on that. There's the school of thought that they are creating a human 2.0, that this is actually a good thing, that they're upgrading our consciousness, that we're going to then, be in these hybrid bodies. If you believe in reincarnation, perhaps we'll be reincarnated then into these more sophisticated alien connected bodies. A lot of researchers will look at this as a good thing. We're going to be psychic, we're going to have telepathic connection. We're going to move beyond wars and beyond human suffering. So that's one side, one way to look at it. The other way to look at it, and the side I identify with more, is that this is actually for nefarious purposes. If you really take a good look at the hybrid creatures that are coming out of these ships, again, some of them, if not many of them, are completely sociopathic and they are abusing us. And so these hybrids they're creating, they're being raised without their mothers and fathers. And they're being raised in this alien orphan type of environment, and it's not going very well. They're not the best of humanity, I can tell you that. And so, did this experiment go awry? I don't know. Um, but it, to have a look at a hybrid sometime and then tell me that this is for our own good, I just don't see it. Um, the other thing is that people like to say, "Oh, it's so great to be in a telepathic environment." No, it's actually not. Imagine not being able to have one of your own thoughts private and constantly always being connected into some type of a hive-minded grid where if you're not towing the line and you're not participating in their agenda, if you even have one disloyal thought, you're punished. And so it's a very totalitarian type of a society, and that's not for me. And so other people might think that's amazing and wonderful. I don't think so. If you look at David Jacobs' work, abductees are being told that there's going to be a change, a time that the change is coming, and that these hybrids will actually almost eliminate Homo sapiens sapiens on the planet. That some of us will be kept for breeding purposes in case the breeding program goes awry, but essentially they'll be taking over the planet from us. Now, some people think that's a great thing. They think humans are terrible and they want to embrace the aliens. Having been in their environment a lot, be careful what you wish for.
Going back to reincarnation, do you think that that is some? It's been proposed that it's a recycling program to keep people sort of trapped in this matrix. Do you agree with that, or do you even subscribe to reincarnation?
I don't know. And so I came into this, I was a Christian. I didn't even entertain something like reincarnation. But when I really started checking into this possibility and I realized my husband was raised Orthodox Jew, he was brought up to believe in reincarnation. So if the Jewish religion, which is older than my religion, believed in reincarnation, it's something I should probably entertain. I had seen a couple shows on it, I read a couple papers on it, and I actually was entertaining this as entirely possible, if not probable, at some point a few years ago. I have since realized that these entities can also control our memories and the things that are put into our minds. And so, if they can download an episode of a past life into my mind, then I really shouldn't believe that past life. And so, could there be past lives? There could be. But there's also instances of abductees being downloaded with fake past lives or past lives of aliens or other abductees or other people. And so I'm a 50-50 right now on reincarnation. Is it possible that reincarnation is something real? Yes, I think it is possible. Does it happen to everyone? Does it happen to only some people? Are only certain souls recycled? It's entirely possible that these creatures, I believe, do have some control over the afterlife. And could they be controlling some of us and recycling some of us and essentially trapping some of us? I do think this is a possibility. In fact, I think it's entirely possible that the reason these hybrids are being created is to actually trap the human soul. And whether that's through reincarnation or not doesn't matter. We come from somewhere. So the human soul comes from somewhere, whether it was recycled or it's just brand new into the human body. If the human soul is inside of a hybrid body, which seems to be their goal, um, and the hybrid body is actually connected into this telepathic hive mind society where they're not even allowed to have a single private thought. Imagine the human soul, which is, about things like love and freedom and, giving a shirt off our back to a homeless person or giving our last meal to a dog. Those things will be gone. Any desire for autonomy or desire for a higher purpose or desire to seek God, those things are now gone. And so ultimately, it's entirely possible they're trying to actually trap our human souls in these hybrid bodies. Would not surprise me in the least. And I've actually been considering that for a couple of years now. They, there is a reason they're still using human women and men to create these hybrids. Why are they not just taking the eggs from human women, mixing it up in a petri dish and sending it off into their little vats to grow? They want conception inside the human woman's body, which tells me there's something metaphysical going on. And I do think it's related to our what we refer to as our soul or our spirit essence. Everything that we are outside of the physical body. I think it is related to that. Otherwise, it makes no sense. And, people say all the time, oh, well, what do they need human women for? They're not abducting human women. They're not actually doing this. If they're master geneticists, why aren't they just using a petri dish? Well, I don't know. You tell me. Why aren't they just using a petri dish? Why aren't they just petri dishing it and putting it into an artificial womb? Why do they want to leave these hybrids inside the human woman's body for a minimum of 4 and sometimes upwards of 8 to 12 weeks? Why are they doing that? There's got to be a reason. They're not stupid.
I've heard the Greys, and I think you've mentioned the Greys too, as being sort of biological robots. So I'm assuming this is not who the other half of the hybrid. What is the entity that is the other half of the hybrid?
I think it is the Greys. I think
Oh,
they're mixing us with the Greys.
hmm.
And so I think they're mixing us with a lot of things, but I think the main program is mixing us with the Greys. But I think the Greys are likely hybrids themselves. I think that when you look at the top of the so-called alien food chain, you have the mantid creatures. They look like hybrids too. So you have the mantids and the reptilians, which mysteriously look like creatures from our very own planet. And then you have the tall grays and the small grays and these Nordic beings that look human. And so I think they're all very likely a mixture of some type of hybrid creations. I think the grays probably have human DNA already, and then they're mixing us with that. So I look at this as a very, very long-term operation where they have been trying for a very, very long time to get the very perfect mixture of alien DNA and human DNA.
And there's the theory too that they are future humans coming back to rectify something that went wrong in the timeline. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, so there is. I got a download plot dropped into my head about the future human thing. When it happened, it made a lot of sense. It actually dropped into my head, and in these moments when this information just kind of plopped in, I know all of the secrets of the universe. And so it got plopped into my head and made a ton of sense. I actually posted about it. And then I started realizing that this is actually being put into a lot of people's heads. And so you have people like Michael Masters, you have Jack Sarfati, who's a physicist, um, other people in the UFO Twitter community. This idea is being plopped down everywhere. And so when I realized that, I realized I'm always looking for the possibility of propaganda, because why are they downloading this information into so many people's heads? And I actually started considering that it might not be true. I consider everything that plop into my head is a possibility of it not being true, or very often there's partial truth there. There's some truth and some lies. Most of the time, it's not all lies. And so I had looked at my own experiences. I had a few experiences where the energy of the beings I was dealing with came off as very future human. In other words, these creatures were very, very human looking, but they had telepathy and they had sophisticated technology. And so when this was dropped into my head, I started thinking about some of the things that had happened to me. And I thought, okay, this could be. This could be some breakaway civilization. It could be future humans, because I'm getting a very human vibe from these creatures. This last weekend, I sat down with someone who's very well experienced with these different types of entities. And this person actually asked me, some details about my own experiences, what they looked like, etc. And I actually came to the conclusion that these were probably very late stage hybrids. And so they probably were not future humans. Does that take future humans off the table? No. But what I do like to put out there is just consider that so much of what we're fed is propaganda. Um, that does not mean that there's no possibility of future humans. We could have had a breakaway civilization from many, many years ago, with extraordinary technology, somehow survive a past cataclysm. I would actually be more inclined toward that than a future human, although I absolutely do not eliminate the possibility of time travel at all.
Hmm.
So it's possible.
Fair enough. Um, how do you fit all of this into your Christian cosmology? Is that ever a clash, or
Oh,
have you found a way to make it make sense?
it does make sense now. Um, I actually had a spiritual crisis because I was a Christian. I feel like I was born a Christian. I was raised in the religion. Had some very strict views about it. I was not taught a lot of the supernatural aspects of the Christian scriptures, the Jewish texts. I think my particular faction of Christianity, my particular denomination, had very much eliminated the supernatural out of the Bible. And so any text that could be interpreted one way or the other went one way. That's how I was taught. Um, so when I first was wrapping my mind around even just what was happening to me, um, I thought these were aliens from outer space. I thought these were extraterrestrials, and I just accepted that, and I didn't question it. And the very first time I heard otherwise was from a gentleman named Ray Boucher. You're probably familiar with him. And I heard him on a podcast, and the podcast was called I think it's called Cultish. And I was listening to Ray Boucher, and he was a paranormal investigator and he was a pastor. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. And so I was listening to him, and he was the first time I heard aliens being equated with or being referred to as demons or demonic. And at that moment, I completely rejected that. I actually felt it in my body as, visceral rejection. That is ridiculous. That is the silliest thing I've ever heard. These things have absolutely nothing to do with demons or spirituality or anything of that nature. They're from outer space. Why would they care about what my religion is or, who our gods are, really? I mean, I guess you would maybe want to study it, but you wouldn't be invested in it, right? I mean, if we came across another planet and creatures, we would be curious, but we wouldn't be invested in it, I don't think, looking at it from the human point of view. So I thought it was ridiculous. I dismissed it and I rejected that for a very long time. Once I realized that this was actually a spiritual battle and I was actually fighting for my own soul during this time, that they were transferring my soul, that they were very interested in it, they seemed to be reverse engineering it. I had to take a step back and ask myself, what is this? And again, I'm in their telepathic environment and I'm coming away with just knowing they're not from outer space and that they have a nefarious agenda. And so I had to stop and think, how does this fit in anywhere? And over many months, again, just learning through my own experiences. When I guess it was probably March, April, I've said this so many times now, that by March or April of 2023, I had gone through my own spiritual crisis. And these entities were trying to walk me away from Christianity. I had become immersed in the New Age. I had been led down this road of the God of the Old Testament was just a negative NHI. I had become exposed to the prison planet theory. And these entities very much wanted me to believe that they were all powerful, that they had created us, that they had created our religions, that they were recycling us, that they were it. Like that's it. Everything you were told was a lie. We are the ones in charge of this operation. And I actually, again, went into a crisis mode. I just thought, how does this fit? I was lied to my whole life. Was I a Christian because it's true or because it was just what I was brought up to believe? Is there any truth to any of this? I explored many different areas of what this could be. In the meanwhile, they're walking me away from my religion. And I realize about the soul transfers. And I start thinking, wait a minute, these things are incredibly deceptive. They're lying. And the more I put their deception and their lies together, the more I was being subjected to extremely traumatic incidents that I probably won't go into detail on today. But the big picture starts coming together. And I start realizing, wait a minute, these are not aliens from outer space. And when I realized that there's a literal battle for my soul, like my survival is actually depending on a choice. And I have to choose them or I have to choose the religion of my birth. And I was actually very much put to the test. And I ended up choosing the religion of my birth. And I stepped away from their propaganda. And I just tried to look at it from the outside with now a lot more knowledge from being in their environment and from really dissecting what was going on with me. And at about March, April, I came across the UFO Twitter community and I start being exposed to the abduction research. And then I start thinking again about Ray Boucher. Wait, what did that guy have to say again? And, I was exposed to him again and I am starting to come across um, the material from people like Chuck Missler, Heiser, and that kind of point of view. And so I think for me, it was very important to not be exposed to that material until I had gone through my own spiritual journey myself. I think I had to see for myself, these are not aliens. Why are they concerned with my soul? Why do they not want me to be in my religion? Why would they care if I was a Christian? That should have nothing to do with them if they were ETs from outer space. And so by this time, I had come across the very demonic entities. I had come across entities that had animal heads. And I, again, was exposed or subjected to some very traumatic incidents. And so I'm realizing, oh, these are not aliens. They're not from outer space. And this is spiritual, straight spiritual warfare, which I had completely rejected several months earlier. When I realized that it's spiritual warfare, and I started really trying to think about what are they? What is this? What are they doing? And then I came across people like Missler and Heiser with the Christian worldview. And I start now revisiting the text like Genesis 6 and realizing I was taught the sanitized version of that text, um, but there's an unsanitized version out there. And once I was exposed to that material coming from my own personal knowledge that this is not smelling right, it all really made a lot of sense to me, and it actually all fits very well.
How would you define a demon anyway? And why was that so different than your concept of an alien?
So the alien, they have a different look, they have a different task, they have a different energy to them. They seem to be pretty task oriented. When I was meeting the demonic creatures, these creatures just there's no other way to describe it. There's just an evil coming off of them. It's just an energy that's just permeating the entirety of the environment. There were some cases when they just wanted me to know what they were. I had one of them give me a name, and he gave me the name of Baphomet, which is a demonic entity. And so, could that entity have been lying? Sure. But why would an actual alien want me to think that it was a demon? And so I'm coming across entities that have these animal heads. Um, and again, by their actions and by the energy that they put off, which is very different from the way an alien looks, the way the aliens are task oriented. The aliens have a lot of technology. So that's the best way to explain it. So to me, a demon is a disembodied entity that is evil or malevolent to humans. And I think these demonic entities actually can use the alien bodies as avatars. The demonic entities I have seen at times inside reptilian bodies. So I have experienced a reptilian as a reptilian, and I've experienced a reptilian as being inhabited by a demonic entity. This was the one told me his name was Baphomet. Um, so they're telling me they're demons. So if this were just an alien, why would an alien want me to think that it was a demon? I mean, that would be strange if it was just an ET from outer space. And then again, their actions. They made it very clear by their actions. They were very sadistic, and I guess the types of behaviors you would think would apply to the reptilian type beings. They can be very sadistic. They like torture. I had been involved in rituals while these reptilian entities were inhabited by demonic entities.
Wow. Um, okay, so you in your 50s, you realize that you're being abducted and that these things do not have your best interests in mind at all, to put it very mildly. And you start pushing back in real time during these experiences, waking up, becoming conscious. Is there, or were there, I should say, any preventative measures that you tried to take in the 3D to try and keep these things from happening?
Yes, I did. I mean, I took every preventative measure I could possibly imagine. So I spent about a year on just a personal quest of trying to figure out how to stop this from happening. At one point, from about April, May of 2023 through October, so for 7 months straight, I actually slept in a helmet made of velostat material. And, I used things like scalar waves and, orgone and different types of crystals and just different, hematite. I tried pretty much everything that was out there in the lore, iron, all kinds of different things. And it kinda seemed in the beginning of this, when things hadn't ramped up too serious, maybe about January, February of 2023, I was trying things like crystals and that kind of stuff, shungite, hematite, that kind of thing. And it seemed like either it was my own wishful thinking or it seemed like it might deter whatever was happening for a day or two. And I would think, oh, maybe this is working. And then they would get through. And it might not have actually been working at all. That might have just been my temporary perception. I tried scalar waves and, again, sleeping in a helmet. The helmet was obviously the most drastic thing I ever did. It was hideous, and, it was made of Velostat and duct tape, and I would put this helmet on, and then I would put a scarf on over it. And, I did that for 7 months, every single night for 7
Wow.
months. So I took what I would consider to be drastic measures, to try to stop this from happening. Unsuccessfully, by the way,
Every single one of them.
every single thing. So, the helmet was probably the best thing I tried. It did seem to stop them temporarily, and then it got to the point where, they showed up at my house in the middle of the day one time. No sleep required. So, they did different things to get around the helmet. I actually kinda use it as a security blanket, to be honest. When I first started wearing it, I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is working." And then as time was going on, I started asking myself, "Wait a minute, are they getting through? Is this virtual reality?" And then I would have the sensations of my actual body being pulled out, and it took me a while to even admit to myself that it wasn't working because, again, I was using it kind of as a security blanket. Um but that was probably the thing that was the most effective. I did have one night where I had the helmet on and I had my scarf on, and my scarf had an emblem on it. And I would make sure that the emblem was in the exact same place every single night. I was religious about this. I mean, by March, April of 2023, I was scared to death to go to sleep because as soon as I went to sleep, and sometimes before I even fell asleep, the second I would even try to lay down, I was in their environment. And so there was a night that I put this thing on, and I had a camera set up in my bedroom at that point, and I got the notification that my, camera just lost Wi-Fi signal, and I thought, "Oh, great. What am I gonna do?" And at that time, I thought, "Well, I have the helmet on, um, what do I do?" So I went to sleep. That night is actually very curiously blank for me. I don't remember being abducted. I don't have any dream memories, I don't think. I would have to look at my journal to see if I even dreamed that night. And when I woke up in the morning, I knew something was wrong immediately. I had just a feeling that something had happened. And I checked my helmet, and my scarf was on backwards or upside down. The emblem was in the wrong place. And that morning, I also had a bloody nose and, a couple other things that made me realize, that the Wi-Fi signal had been down for 3.5 hours, and then the scarf being on backwards, and then waking up with a bloody nose was pretty much everything I needed to say to myself, "Okay." So, it's a good example for me of having no memories from that night before. I did not perceive that I was abducted, and honestly, I don't even know what happened. I don't know, maybe I wasn't even taken out of my environment. Maybe they showed up and just took my helmet off and did whatever they wanted to do while I was right there in my bed. Um, but that's a good example of something physical happened because my helmet was removed, my scarf was removed from my head. My Wi-Fi was down, I have a bloody nose. But yet no memories of being abducted. And quite often, abductees don't remember. They just wake up with strange bruises on their bodies and strange happenings and maybe some strange dreams. And it takes many years to start asking themselves what's actually going on here. So if I didn't have a camera set up and I wasn't wearing a helmet, it probably would have just gone unnoticed. I would have woken up in the morning with just a bloody nose and not thought much of it.
Did you ever get to the point where, and maybe you did several times, where you specifically stated in no uncertain terms that you do not consent to this activity?
Absolutely,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So I started out before I actually put the helmet on, I was looking for every way I could possibly think of to stop it. I got all of the prayers out, I did all of the disconnect ceremonies. I was working with a researcher who told me to visualize unplugging myself, like me, I'm the plug, I'm plugging it from the wall, saying it out loud, citing mantras out loud. I don't consent, cutting cords, ceremonies, all of this kind of stuff. I did all of it. I don't think there's anything out there you could ask me that I didn't do. There might be one random thing. I don't think so, though. I think I did it all. And none of it worked. None of it worked. So, I mean, to this day, it didn't work. Nothing's worked. I've been to deliverance. Um, Deliverance was actually very beneficial for me and very empowering for me. And if there were any cords left or any ancestral ties left, those are gone. So I found it, very good and beneficial. And I wish I had come out the other side of that, being able to tell you that everything stopped, but that's not true. It didn't stop. Now, the very demonic type activity, the supernatural, paranormal type activity is down from where it was. So it's come way, way down. But the actual alien side of it, of them taking women to create hybrid children, that has not stopped. And also these missions that I go on has not stopped. So I think the paranormal supernatural aspect absolutely can be helped by spiritual warfare type strategies, including something like deliverance with the right people. I wouldn't just go to deliverance, at your average everyday weekend deliverance that's advertised, at your local church. I would be very careful who you go into that with. But I think it's a great strategy for the supernatural side of this.
So what did that entail? I'm not familiar with deliverance and what that involves.
So, deliverance, I think we have about, what, 10 minutes left?
Well, we can go maybe 15 past
Okay.
if you're good with that.
Okay, we'll see what happens.
Okay.
So I, after looking into, talking to some researchers and looking into this whole thing, I realized that that this is very likely bloodlines and genetics. I realized that this is happening to my father's side of the family. I realized this happened to my mother's side of the family. And about the summer of 2023, I seriously considered actually asking a pastor, friend of mine, who's a friend of the family, has been a friend of the family, actually married into my family for 20, 25 years, something like that. I had actually considered asking him to come to my home and pray over my home, any strategy he could possibly help me to disconnect from these entities. These entities were coming through into the 3D. I was being touched, grabbed, etc., and I won't go into details, in my 3D waking life. These things were coming through. And so I'm desperate. I'm sleeping in the helmet. I'm considering having my pastor friend come out. Um, and then I really got through the worst of it on my own. I actually had a pastor friend of mine who was involved in some extraordinary actual healing, not the fake stuff you see on TV, but an actual real healing of a young boy who had been dead for 40 or 45 minutes. Um, say a prayer over me during that summer. And this is when I'm starting to realize, man, this is, it's such a long story. Okay. So, I end up getting through the most of my crisis, most of my spiritual crisis, most of my fear of going to sleep. I start realizing they're getting me anyway. At some point, I just have to face this and I have to stop being so afraid. They want me to be afraid. They want me to be terrified to go to sleep. This is, they feed off of this. So in October, I think 19th of 2023, I took off the helmet. I was on vacation. So I thought, maybe it's going to be a little harder for them to find me. So this is my opportunity outside of my home, where many, many terrible things have happened, by the way. Take off the helmet. And I come into about December of 2023 feeling pretty good. I had gotten over the crisis. I was over the actual terror of not wanting to go to sleep. And what's happening at this point is my mother is experiencing extreme interference from just straight demonic entities. Um, Smoke, smoky, black, negative energy attacking her. And then at some point in that December, she actually saw a mantid in her bedroom. So she's going through an absolute crisis. very similar to the crisis I had gone through in the spring. So I thought, I'm kind of out of this. I think I understand this. I'm coming through the other side. But because my mom was experiencing straight demonic attacks, and that's how she perceived it, I ended up saying, Mom, I'm going to call this family friend of ours, married into the family 20, 25 years. We've known this person. And I'm just going to run this by him because I knew that he had a deliverance ministry. I didn't know much about it, but essentially it's exorcism, like what you would think
Hmm.
about in the Catholic Church as exorcism. That's the Christian version of exorcism. I,
Gotcha.
I hadn't heard too much, but I knew that he was involved in this. I knew he was a pastor, of course I knew, and I knew he was involved in this ministry to some extent. To what extent, I didn't really know. So I called him for my mother. And through just some various synchronicities, we made an appointment for us to go. This was a week-long event where we had to travel to another state to go to deliverance because I trusted this man. Again, I've known him for many, many years. He wasn't just some guy I met on the street or some pastor I walked into somebody's church. And so we made an appointment to go to deliverance, and I told her I would go with her. Now, at this point, I didn't think I even needed deliverance. I thought, I know exactly what this is. I've come back to my faith. I can see this. I can see right through it, and I know what I'm dealing with. But because she was in such a crisis, I said I would go with her. Well, she ends up getting so bad that I actually make an emergency phone call to this pastor, and I say, You've got to see her right now." It was very, very serious. Um, so she actually went to deliverance early. They actually kind of like squeezed her in because he's got a waiting list of many months. And he squeezes her in. She goes by herself. I didn't go with her. She went with her husband. And both she and her husband actually go through deliverance. And now I already have an appointment for a couple of months later. And I'm thinking, you know, do I even really need to go? I don't even know that I need this. I'm feeling pretty good about everything. I think I have a handle on everything that this is. And through another series of interesting synchronicities, just to make the story a little shorter, my husband and I keep that original appointment that me and my mom were supposed to go to. My husband was never going to go to deliverance. There was absolutely no chance. This was, not his thing. But it was me and my mom. And so me and my husband end up going together. And to make a very long story short, it's probably just an entire episode, the deliverance part of it. Me and my husband go, and you said, what does deliverance entail? So the very first day, they explained to us, I meet this friend of the family, he's a pastor, but he has a whole team of people on his team. And the very first day, the pastor tells me and my husband, look, these are the things I've seen, and what could happen. And he tells us of an incident where he has seen people, and I'm just going to speak in generalities because I would look at my journal to see exactly what he said. So speaking in generalities, he had seen people levitate. He had seen people crawling like a snake across the floor. He had seen people throwing up in the trash can. And he just told us, hey, you need to be ready for anything. Well, me and my husband are thinking, if we didn't already know him and didn't already 100% trust him, we were thinking, come on, man, come on. There's no way something like that's going to happen. So we went into it very unbelieving. Like, neither one of us are going to be levitating. And by the way, neither one of us levitated. Just to get that out of the
Just
way.
to get that out of the
I
way. Yeah.
don't want anybody to think, oh, they were levitating. Um, Neither one of us levitated, but some very interesting things did happen. And if we didn't already know him and trust him, I would have probably walked out at that moment because those are the things you see on TV. Those aren't real life things, right? That's what you see on TV. And so that's the first day. And the first day is just a meet and greet. I met the rest of the team. They did some prayers. They want to know the history. I filled out a bunch of paperwork on my history on everything I've ever been involved with, including things like the Ouija board and all of my family history, with my mom and my biological father, my actual adopted father, everything. So by day 3, and my story is actually a little complicated, but what I will tell you is by day 3, well, hang on. I could tell you this part. So the first day, they want my husband to go first. This is either the first or second day. They want my husband to go first, and, my friend, who's the pastor, gives me a book to read, and I think it's called The Serpent and the Savior or something like this, but anyway, it's the story of Anton LaVey, and my pastor was involved with the gentleman who was in that who wrote that book. So they were personal friends or something. They were from the same area, and he was, very well acquainted with this story. So he gives me the book. He goes, "Hey, you could go out to the car and read this," while my husband was going up first. And so my husband goes in, I go out to the car, and I'm reading this book. And I start seeing stuff in this book about people levitating and crawling across the floor. And I was just like, "What is happening? I can't believe this would actually happen to people." Very, very much in doubt. Oh, this is gonna get into way too long of a story. Okay,
I
what
mean,
I
it's
will
up to
tell
you.
you.
Yeah, it's up
What's
to you.
that? I'm running up against
If you wanna tell it, but
the
if you
time
get a
here.
hard stop, then we can continue it next time.
Okay, what I will tell you is I'm gonna leave most of my stuff out. What I will tell you is on day 2 or 3, the pastor comes out. So the routine was for us to go to the appointment. We would drive together. My husband would go in for a couple of hours, and I would sit out in the car and just entertain myself, and then we would switch. And then we would go to dinner, and then we were actually staying in a hotel, and, we would talk about our day. And so on day 2 or 3, I would have to look. He goes in, and I'm out in the car, and I'm just minding my own business. Well, the pastor comes out, and keep in mind, I know this man. He's a family friend. I've known him for 20, 25 years. I trust him, entirely trust him, wholeheartedly trust him. He comes out to me, and he says, "Hey, um, we're up against something right now, and we need some more time with my husband." And I'm going, "What? What are you talking about?" And so, of course, I say, "No, go ahead." So they're now taking my time. He actually comes and gets 2 more members of the team and takes them into the room with my husband. And so I'm just sitting out in the car by myself. I have no idea what's going on, but they take, I think, an extra hour. And my husband walks out of that building, and he looks like he's been hit by a truck. And I just am thinking, "What in the world, happened in there?" And we just have a very brief exchange. I just say, "Are you okay? Please don't drive." He was a wreck. I could just, and I can think of one other time I've seen him like this, and it's when he almost lost consciousness during a triathlon. was was 20, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. So now I go in, and I'm not going to get into my story because it's a whole other thing. But I end up finding out later on that night, once I was finished, my husband tells me that he was actually dry heaving into a trash can, um, over the deliverance prayers. And he tells me that at one point he could feel this entity take over his body, and the entity wanted to kill the pastor, our family friend. He said he could feel it in there, and he there was a moment when he actually looks up and gives the pastor the evil eye, and I don't wanna say what the words were because I would have to look, or I would have to ask him to tell his own story, but it was to the point where he could feel the entity inside of him wanting to kill the pastor, and again, he's vomiting into the trash can. Now, if you had told me, well, if you had, they did. They told me and my husband at the beginning of this, "Stand by. We have seen some crazy stuff." There is no way that neither one of us, it's not like we didn't buy into it because I don't think he's lying to me, but there's no way that's actually happening to us, me or him. No way. And by the way, we're there for me. We're not even there for him. It was some
Yeah,
weird
exactly.
synchronicity that even brought him there because my mom had
Mhm.
already gone. And so that's just that part of the story. It's actually it would probably take an hour to tell the actual, everything that happened. But that's what happened, part of what happened
Wow.
during deliverance. And he ended up, so my husband, has also had his own experiences with the phenomenon. When he was a child, he saw a very short green entity in his room. He had some type of experience where he woke up and he sees the entity, and at about the same time, his dad actually comes running in and grabs him out of his room and takes him into his parents' room. And so somehow his dad had also seen something. that his dad didn't like, and he came and rescued my husband out of his bedroom. We've also had some shared incidents on a couple of these missions. And then he has seen this certain demonic entity as well in his own separate experiences. So he definitely had some baggage, but never in anyone's wildest dreams did we expect that he would be. And by the way, if he weren't my husband, I'm not sure how much I would have bought into it, to the severity of it. I mean, the man was telling me I was dry heaving, uncontrollably drooling into a trash can. I had no control over my own body. So, yeah, that was our
Wow.
deliverance experience, and it goes actually way on from there. Some very interesting things happen.
I would love to hear more about it if
Good.
you would honor us to appear again at some point and maybe go into more detail about that and other questions if you would be open to doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll answer any question I can. I mean, and
Fantastic.
to the
I
best
am
of my
very
ability.
appreciative. I'm very appreciative of that and your openness and your candor and being generous with your time and coming on and speaking with us today. I really, really appreciate it. Intense stuff. My God. And there are more questions, but we can save it until next time. But in the meantime, maybe tell the people that are listening or watching us where they can find you and your stuff.
Yeah, so I can be found at fringe.com on X, Twitter. That's the only social media I have where I discuss this type of thing. And yeah, I get a lot of DMs. I get a lot of people reaching out. A lot of people, this is happening to a lot of people. This is something that a lot of people can't discuss even with their spouses. I think I said earlier. It's very stigmatizing, and sometimes whatever our perceptions are of the phenomenon, we just need someone to talk to. And I will say that we met, I think, through UFO Twitter or through Twitter initially, and it's really a great place just to connect with other people this is happening to. We have a little community there where you can come tell your story and nobody's going to laugh. And if they do, they're going to, well, if they're in my space, they'll get bounced. Um, so it's just really good for people to have a place to connect and to talk to other people. And people have literally said their lives were saved just by being able to connect with someone else this is happening to. So anyone's free to reach out to me there. I talk to a lot of different people every week. I listen to people's stories, and it's just sometimes great to say, "Hey, that happened to me too," and to know you're not alone. So that's where I'm at.
Definitely.
And I wanted to say
Fantastic.
thank you to you, for your podcast, because this is a very stigmatizing topic. I know it's not your only topic. There's a lot of things to talk about on the fringe of our reality, but it's important for people like you to be delivering the topic for people like me. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's a two-way street. And you have a website too, right?
I do. I haven't updated it in a minute, but I do have a
Mhm.
blog on there that I was writing on. And it's full of interesting topics, and I have a few blogs there. So yeah, if you want to get the um 4D view of what I think is going on, or at least some ideas of what could be going on. I don't buy into all of them. Yeah, I have a website. It's called fringethink.com. And you can
Fantastic.
it's actually linked on my X page. So you can find it there too.
Cool. And those links will be in the episode notes. Thank you so much, Fringe.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Yes. And we'll do it again if you're up for it. And I will let you know when this comes out and send you the links and you can share it on your spaces if you'd like to.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much. And I will be in touch and let you know when this comes out.
All right, great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.